They said the old veteran on the mountainside had gone mad. While the town awaited winter, he burned wood day after day, thin smoke rising from the slopes like a foolish signal. People whispered that he was wasting the little the forest could offer. Some laughed, some shook their heads. No one listened. But the mountain listened. The rain came first, weeks after week, then months. The wood rotted in place. The axes fell silent. When the cold finally arrived, it came violently, freezing the roads, soaking the logs, and turning every fireplace into a terrifying place instead of a warm one. That's when the fires went out. Doors were shut. Breath froze in the houses. Children slept in their coats. And those who had mocked the man for burning wood too. Then, through the snow, the veteran descended the mountain, pulling a small sled, his German shepherd beside him, carrying burning black stones, whose meaning no one understood until almost too late. This is not a story about pride. This is a story about wisdom, quiet faith, and the miracle before the storm. Follow the story to the end. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support is a huge motivation for us. The mountain above Larchford breathed damp air that summer, mist clinging low to the trees while the sky stayed an uneasy gray, as if the season itself had forgotten how to move on. Thaddeus Rowan lived where the road stopped pretending to exist. His house sat higher than the last utility pole, a rough timber structure anchored into the slope of Garnet Hollow, facing the valley but never fully joining it. The logs were hand-fitted, the roof heavy with overlapping planks darkened by years of weather. It was not a cabin built for comfort. It was a house built for endurance. Thaddeus was in his late 50s, tall but permanently stooped, as if the mountains had slowly pressed their shape into his spine. His shoulders were broad, still carrying the width of a younger, stronger man, but his movements had grown economical, deliberate. His beard was thick and iron gray, cut short not for style but because long hair caught on branches and tools. Deep lines framed his mouth, not from laughter, but from years of clenching his jaw against things that never fully left him. His eyes were pale, almost washed-out blue, the kind that missed nothing and trusted even less. He did not hate people. That was the lie the town liked to tell itself. Thaddeus was simply tired of voices, of noise that demanded something from him when he had nothing left to give. After the war, after the long months of learning how to sleep again, how to stand in a grocery aisle without counting exits, he had learned one hard truth. Silence could be a kind of medicine. Brask was his constant. The German shepherd was just over 6 years old, large even for the breed, with a dense black saddle and dark tan legs that looked almost bronze in sunlight. His muzzle had begun to gray early, giving him an older, wiser expression than his age suggested. Brask's ears stood tall and alert even at rest, and his amber-brown eyes tracked the world with quiet intelligence. He rarely barked. When he did, Thaddeus listened. Every morning they walked the forest edge together. Thaddeus carried a short-handled axe and a coil of rope slung over one shoulder. Brask moved ahead, nose low, reading the ground like a living map. They followed the same loop most days, not out of habit, but out of observation. Thaddeus watched the land the way he once watched roads overseas, always asking what had changed. That year everything had. The rain did not come in hard bursts like it used to. It lingered. Fine mist settled into the soil and refused to leave. The ground stayed soft underfoot long after it should have firmed up. At night the wind shifted direction unpredictably, sliding down the valley instead of up, carrying the smell of wet rot instead of clean pine. Even the birds noticed. Flocks that normally waited another month lifted early and vanished south without ceremony. Thaddeus stopped one morning at the edge of the trees, crouched, and pressed his fingers into the soil. It crumbled too easily, slick with moisture beneath the surface. He exhaled slowly. "This isn't right," he murmured. Brask lifted his head, ears angling toward the hollow below. He let out a low, uncertain huff. Thaddeus had learned to trust patterns more than forecasts. In the service, Storms rarely announced themselves politely. They gathered quietly, stacked pressure, then arrived all at once. Garnet Hollow felt the same. A long rain season meant soaked wood. Soaked wood meant no clean burn. And when winter came, and it always did in these mountains, the snow would seal the higher trails first. Anyone who waited until cold arrived to gather fuel would be too late. That night, Thaddeus sat at his small table, lantern light flickering against the log walls, running numbers in his head. Not money. Time. How many dry days remained? How much wood he could cut before the rains worsened? How long it took to turn raw timber into something that could burn when everything else was wet? By morning, the decision was made. The next day, smoke rose from the slope above his house for the first time in years. Thaddeus began building a charcoal kiln the way he had been taught long ago by an old backwoodsman who believed knowledge was meant to be passed quietly. He dug into the earth until he reached firm ground, lined the pit with stone, and stacked split hardwood in tight, deliberate patterns that left just enough space for heat to travel. Over the wood, he layered damp brush and packed earth thick enough to choke oxygen. Fire, but controlled, burning, without flame. The first firing took all day. Thaddeus watched the smoke closely, adjusting small vents with a stick, sealing them when the smoke thinned and changed color. Brask lay nearby, chin on his paws, eyes never fully closed. When the kiln finally sealed and the earth above it went still, Thaddeus left it alone. Patience mattered more than effort. Word traveled downhill faster than the smoke. A few days later, Thaddeus drove his old flatbed into Larchford for supplies. The town sat lower in the valley, clustered around a single main road lined with aging storefronts and weathered homes. Near the hardware shed, he spotted Sarah Klein standing with a basket of laundry on her hip. Sarah was in her early 40s, tall and lean, with sun-browned skin and dark auburn hair usually tied back in a practical braid. Her face was sharp in a thoughtful way, cheekbones high, eyes observant rather than curious. She had moved to Larchford after her husband's death in a logging accident years earlier, and had learned to carry herself with quiet self-reliance. When she smiled, it was brief but genuine. She glanced at Thaddeus, then at the soot marks on his sleeves. "You're burning wood already," she said, not accusing, just stating a fact. He nodded once. "Making charcoal." Her brow creased slightly. "Before winter?" "Before the rains ruin everything else." Behind her, two men unloading crates laughed openly. One shook his head. "Man's lost his sense," he said, to no one in particular. "Burning fuel when we'll need it most." Thaddeus didn't respond. He never did. Brask stepped closer to his leg, tail low but steady, eyes fixed on the men until they looked away. Sarah studied Thaddeus a moment longer. "You sure about this?" she asked. Thaddeus met her gaze. "I've been sure about worse." She didn't argue. She simply nodded and stepped aside to let him pass. Back on the mountain, the routine settled in. Every day, Thaddeus hauled wood, stacked kilns, sealed earth, and waited. The smoke rose thin and controlled, never wild. Brask stood watch, reacting to subtle shifts in wind long before Thaddeus felt them. When rain thickened, Thaddeus adjusted, working longer hours between storms, hands raw, muscles aching but mind steady. Down in Larchford, the jokes continued. People called it wasteful, reckless. Some said the mountain had finally broken him. Thaddeus heard none of it from where he stood. He watched the sky instead. One evening, as rain whispered steadily against the roof, Thaddeus sat on the porch with Brask at his feet. He listened to the distant thunder rolling too slowly, too deeply. He felt it in his bones the same way he once felt incoming trouble across desert ground. "Long season coming," he said quietly. Brask rose and moved to the edge of the porch, body squared toward the valley, a silent sentinel. Thaddeus rested a hand on the dog's broad back, grounding himself in the solid warmth beneath his palm. The town still laughed, The rain kept falling, and high above Larchford, blackened earth cooled slowly over sealed fire, storing heat for a winter that had not yet arrived. Thaddeus Rowan settled into a rhythm that left no room for doubt. Morning was for hauling. He rose before light, when the mountain still held the night close, frost slick on the grass even though the calendar insisted it was not yet autumn. He worked with slow precision, cutting only seasoned hardwood, oak and maple mostly, never the green saplings that would rot before they burned. His axe strikes were measured, not loud, each swing placed to split, not shatter. Brask stayed close, pacing the perimeter, nose skimming the ground, ears twitching toward distant sounds long before Thaddeus noticed them. By afternoon, the wood lay stacked near the kiln site, split and sorted by thickness. Thaddeus believed waste came not from using resources, but from using them badly. He arranged the logs in tight vertical rings, leaving a narrow channel at the center like the spine of a tower. This chimney was not meant to roar, it was meant to breathe. Around the wood he layered damp brush, old burlap sacks soaked from the creek, and finally heavy soil tamped down with the back of his shovel until the mound looked less like a fire pit and more like a low, earthen grave. When evening came, he lit the kiln. The fire caught gently, exactly as intended. No open flame burst skyward. Instead, a thin ribbon of smoke rose, pale and heavy with moisture. Thaddeus watched it the way a doctor watched breath. Too white meant water still escaping the wood. Too dark meant oxygen slipping through where it shouldn't. He crouched, sealing one vent with clay, opening another with the tip of a stick, coaxing the heat to do its quiet work. Brask lay nearby, head on his paws, eyes half-lidded but alert. When the wind shifted, the dog rose and repositioned himself without a sound, body angled to block the scent from drifting downhill. This cycle repeated day after day. Morning, wood. Afternoon, stacking and sealing. Evening, smoke and silence. From below, the town noticed. The first comments were casual. Men unloading crates at the supply shed pointed toward the mountain and laughed about the chimney that never slept. Soon, the remarks sharpened. Thaddeus heard them when he drove into Larchford for nails and lamp oil. "You know he's burning his own winter away," said a broad-shouldered man with a red beard, leaning against a post outside the general store. His name was Caleb Morris, a sawmill hand known for speaking louder than he thought. "Come January, he'll be begging for scraps." Another chimed in, thinner, younger, with restless eyes. "Doesn't even build a proper fire, just smothers it like he's afraid of it." Thaddeus passed without slowing. Brask paused, turning his head just enough to meet their stares. His posture changed, not aggressive but unmistakably firm. The men fell silent until Thaddeus was gone. Sarah Klein watched from across the street, arms folded against her chest. She had noticed the smoke too. Thaddeus adjusted his routine, covering finished charcoal pits with extra layers of soil, marking them carefully so he wouldn't open them too early. Opening a kiln before it cooled was a mistake you only made once. Oxygen would rush in, and hours of work would vanish into ash. One afternoon, as he tamped earth around a sealed mound, Brask stiffened. His ears pricked forward, nose lifting toward the lower trail. Thaddeus straightened slowly. "What is it?" The dog let out a short, sharp bark, not alarm, but notice. Moments later, a figure emerged from the trees. It was Elias Horn, a lanky man in his early 30s, with narrow shoulders and a perpetual slouch, as if he expected to be corrected at any moment. Elias worked odd jobs around Larchford, hauling water, mending fences. His brown hair hung in uneven strands beneath a battered cap, and his hands were always raw from labor that never quite paid enough. I was told you might need help," Elias said, stopping several yards away. He glanced nervously at Brask. Thaddeus studied him. "Who told you that?" Elias shrugged. "Sarah, she said you work alone too much." Thaddeus considered, then nodded once. "You can carry. Don't touch the kiln." Elias blinked. "That's it?" That's it. For the next few hours, Elias hauled split logs from the edge of the clearing to the stacking area. He worked hard, if clumsily, asking questions Thaddeus did not answer. Why bury the fire? Why wait days to open it? Why not just burn the wood now and be done with it? Thaddeus let the rain answer. As the afternoon wore on, the mist thickened until Elias's sleeves were soaked through. He rubbed his hands together, breath fogging the air. "Cold already," he muttered. "It's not," Thaddeus said, "but it will be." Elias glanced toward the valley, where smoke from the town chimneys struggled against the damp air. "They say you're crazy," he admitted quietly. Thaddeus tamped soil with steady pressure. "They can say it from warm kitchens." Elias didn't argue. When the work was done, he nodded awkwardly and left, glancing back once at the low earthen mounds, as if trying to understand something just out of reach. That night, the rain came harder. Thunder rolled distant and slow, as if the sky itself were dragging something heavy. Thaddeus sat under the porch eaves, listening. Brask lay at his feet, body angled toward the dark. "Long burn," Thaddeus murmured, "just like we planned." Days passed, then weeks. The kiln cycle multiplied. Mound after mound cooled beneath packed earth, storing blackened wood transformed by patience. Thaddeus labeled each with a carved marker, counting not in units but in nights of heat. He calculated how many households a single mound could warm if used correctly. He did not tell anyone these numbers. Not yet. In Larchford, the jokes grew sharper as the weather worsened. Woodpiles stayed wet. Axes rang less often. People began burning anything that would catch. Old pallets, broken furniture, fence rails. Smoke grew thick and sour, clinging low to the streets. One evening, Thaddeus stood at the forest edge watching clouds pile against the ridgeline. Brask paced, unsettled. The dog's fur bristled as a gust of damp wind carried the smell of rot and rain uphill. "They're going to feel it," Thaddeus said softly, "before they understand it." Below, laughter drifted faintly from the edge of town, nervous now, edged with uncertainty. Thaddeus turned away, returning to the quiet work that required no belief from anyone else. The kilns breathed, the mountain listened, and beneath the soil, heat waited, banked against a future no one in Larchford was ready to imagine. Rain ruled Garnet Hollow now, not in bursts, but in occupation. It pressed down day after day, soaking the earth until the ground no longer absorbed it, only surrendered. The slopes above Larchford turned slick and treacherous, mud sliding beneath boots like something alive, and the forest paths grew narrow with runoff carving shallow veins through the soil. Thaddeus Rowan felt the change in his hands first. The damp worked its way through gloves, into skin, settling deep in the joints. His fingers stiffened faster each morning, the ache slow and persistent, the kind that didn't fade with warmth. He flexed them anyway, refusing to let the cold claim more than it was owed. Brask paced nearby, thick fur darkened by mist, shaking off rain in short, irritated bursts before returning to his watch. Wood had become a problem for everyone else. The forest floor no longer offered dry branches. Fallen logs sweated moisture, bark peeling away in slick strips. In Larchford, stacks of firewood sat under tarps that trapped damp instead of keeping it out. Axes rang less often. The small crew of woodsmen who usually cut higher elevations had stopped going up altogether. The trails were too dangerous now. One wrong step, one sudden slide, and the mountain would take what it wanted. Thaddeus adjusted. He always did. He moved slower, choosing routes that hugged rock faces instead of open slopes, reading the land the way he read weathered faces, looking for stress lines, soft spots, signs of failure. Brask stayed close, no longer ranging far ahead. His tail stayed low, sweeping the air in careful arcs, ears flicking at every rumble of shifting earth. Late one afternoon, as the rain eased briefly into a gray drizzle, Brask stopped dead. Thaddeus felt it before he heard it. The faint vibration beneath his boots, a wrongness in the silence. Then came the sound. Water moving too fast, too loud, not flowing but forcing its way downhill. He followed Brask toward the lower ravine, boots sinking deep into mud. The stream that fed the western edge of Larchford had swollen beyond its banks, brown and angry, carrying branches, stones, and leaves in a relentless surge. 50 yards upstream, a massive pine lay across the channel, roots torn free, trunk wedged tight between two boulders. Water backed up behind it, spilling over the banks, carving fresh paths into the soil. If it broke loose all at once, it would flood the lower houses. Thaddeus exhaled slowly. That won't wait. By the time he reached the edge of the ravine, a small group had gathered on the opposite bank. Mostly younger townsfolk, men in their 20s and early 30s, faces tight with uncertainty, boots already slick with mud. One of them was Elias Horn, his thin frame hunched against the rain, cap pulled low. Nearby stood a broad-shouldered man Thaddeus didn't recognize. Thick neck, short dark beard, arms crossed like he was bracing against more than the weather. "That thing goes," the bearded man said, voice raised over the water. "We're done, but I'm not going in there. Slope's ready to slide." Elias glanced up as Thaddeus approached. Relief flickered across his face. "Mr. Rowan," he said quickly, "we were going to, well, we weren't sure." Thaddeus studied the scene without answering. The tree was under tension, wedged hard, its weight pressing into unstable ground. Cutting from the wrong side would release it violently. Water pressure had to be relieved first, slowly, controlled. He shrugged off his coat and handed it to Elias. "Hold that." Elias took it without thinking. Thaddeus moved along the bank, testing footing with his boot, choosing a path that kept him on exposed rock instead of soft soil. Brask followed, placing his paws exactly where Thaddeus stepped, muscles taut but steady. The bearded man called out, "You planning to die for a creek?" Thaddeus didn't look up. "I'm planning not to let it choose for us." He reached the upstream side and wedged himself against the rock face, rain slicking his beard and hair flat against his head. With measured strikes, he cut smaller branches first, easing pressure bit by bit. Water spilled through in narrow channels, the sound shifting from roar to rush. Brask stood behind him, braced, ready to pull if Thaddeus slipped. Minutes stretched. Mud slid once beneath his boot, and his heart spiked, but Brask pressed into his leg, anchoring him just long enough to recover. Thaddeus adjusted, changed angle, kept cutting. Finally, with a groan that echoed through the ravine, the trunk shifted, rolling forward and freeing the stream in a controlled surge rather than a violent release. Water rushed through cleanly, level dropping fast. No one cheered. They simply stared as Thaddeus stepped back, breathing hard, hands shaking slightly from exertion and cold. He retrieved his coat from Elias and pulled it on, muscles already stiffening. The bearded man nodded once. "Could have gone bad." "It could have," Thaddeus replied. "That's why you don't rush it." Elias looked at the cleared channel, then back at Thaddeus. "You didn't have to do that." Thaddeus met his eyes briefly. "Yes," he said quietly, "I did." Word traveled faster than rain. By evening, people in Larchford spoke of the stream in lower tones, not as a problem avoided, but as a warning. The mountain was shifting. The season was not behaving. Damp crept into homes and into tempers alike. Children coughed more at night. Elderly hands shook longer before warming. Sarah Klein stood at her back door that night, watching rain bead on the railings, her auburn hair pulled loose from its braid, darkened by moisture. When Thaddeus passed on his way uphill, she called out softly, "You kept the water off the west row." He nodded. She studied him, rain glistening on her sun-browned skin. People noticed. "That wasn't the point." She smiled faintly. "It never is with you." Higher on the mountain, the kilns continued their quiet work. Thaddeus opened none of them yet. Each mound cooled under packed earth, charcoal forming slowly within. He ran his hands over the soil, feeling for warmth, counting days. Opening too soon would waste everything. Waiting too long would change nothing. Timing mattered. Brask grew more restless as the weeks dragged on. The dog's coat thickened, shedding less water, his movements tighter, more economical. He spent longer hours facing the valley, nose lifted, reading scents carried upward by the damp wind. Sometimes he let out a low whine, not fear, but insistence. "I know," Thaddeus murmured more than once. "I know." One morning, rain turned briefly to sleet, tiny pellets stinging skin before melting into cold slurry on the ground. Thaddeus paused on the porch, watching the sky. The clouds hung low and heavy, layered like bruises. This wasn't winter yet, but it was its shadow. Down below, laughter still surfaced now and then, brittle and short-lived. Jokes about smoke on the mountain faded quickly when axes slipped from numb hands and fires struggled to stay lit. People burned what they could find, and still the damp crept in. Thaddeus said nothing. He returned to his work. That night, as rain hammered the roof and water raced through the newly cleared stream, Thaddeus sat inside, hands wrapped around a tin mug, Brask at his feet. He listened to the rhythm of the storm, not angry now, just relentless. "They'll feel it soon," he said quietly. "Not because I tell them, because the mountain will." Outside, the rain fell harder. Inside the sealed kilns, blackened wood waited, light and dry, holding heat the way a promise holds breath. Winter arrived without ceremony. One morning, the rain simply stopped, the air thinned, and the temperature fell hard enough that breath turned visible and stayed that way. By dusk, the first snow drifted down, light at first, then steady, coating the valley in a pale silence that swallowed sound and made every small road a trap of glassy ice. Thaddeus Rowan woke before dawn and stood on his porch, watching flakes gather on the rail. The snow wasn't heavy, not yet, but it was decisive. It changed everything. He felt the shift in his knees, in the tightness of his hands, in the way the wind cut straighter through layers. Brask stood beside him, broad chest squared toward the valley, ears erect, breath pluming. The dog's coat had thickened over the long, wet weeks, black saddle dark against the white settling on his back. He did not bark. He did not need to. The cold spoke plainly enough. Down in Larchford, fires struggled. The wood that had soaked through the long rains hissed and smoked instead of catching, leaving kitchens hazy and lungs burning. Chimneys belched damp, sour plumes that hung low, clinging to windows and porches. People fed their stoves constantly and still could not keep rooms warm. Children slept in coats. Old men coughed through the night. By the second week of snow, the sound that defined the town was no longer laughter or axes, but the thin rattle of teeth. Sarah Klein learned it firsthand. She stood at her stove one evening, coaxing flame from a pile of damp splits that refused to take. Her auburn hair, usually braided tight, hung loose around her shoulders now, static frizzed by the dry cold. Her sun-browned skin looked paler in the weak light, lines deeper around her eyes. When the fire finally sputtered out again, she pressed her palms to the counter and closed her eyes, listening to the house cool around her. Across town, Elias Horn burned the last of a broken fence rail and watched it collapse into embers too weak to heat a kettle. His thin frame shook as he wrapped his jacket tighter. He thought of the mountain, of the smoke that had risen there every evening while everyone else joked. By the end of the second week, the town stopped joking. A small crowd gathered near the general store, breath fogging, voices low and tight. Caleb Morris stood with his red beard rimed with frost, staring at the empty racks where firewood used to be stacked. His bravado had faded. The cold had sanded it down to something closer to fear. "We can't keep burning trash," he muttered. "We'll poison ourselves before spring." No one argued. They simply looked toward the mountain. Thaddeus did not go down to the town. He stayed where he was, checking his kilns one by one, testing the soil with the back of his hand, counting days. The mounds were cold now, sealed long enough. Inside, the charcoal had finished forming, light, black, clean. He opened one at last, carefully, letting no oxygen rush in. The scent was sharp and dry, unmistakable. He lifted a piece and weighed it in his palm. It felt like certainty. Brask watched, tail low and steady. When Thaddeus stacked the charcoal into thick sacks lined with oilcloth, the dog followed each movement with focused attention, as if memorizing a plan. That night, snow fell harder. The roads disappeared beneath a clean white sheet that reflected moonlight and made distance deceptive. Thaddeus slept little. He listened to the mountains settle and to the distant quiet below, a quiet that meant fires were going out. At first light, he loaded the sled. It was a simple thing. Wooden runners reinforced with iron bands, rope knotted by habit rather than thought. He stacked the sacks with care, balancing weight so the sled would track straight on ice. Brask paced beside him, breath quick with cold and anticipation. They reached the edge of town just as people began to step out onto their porches, faces drawn, eyes hollow from smoke and cold. Conversation stopped when they saw the sled. Thaddeus did not make a speech. He stopped at the first house and lifted a sack down. The homeowner, a woman with gray hair pulled into a tight bun, stared at the black chunks inside as if they were foreign objects. "Charcoal," Thaddeus said. "It'll catch when wood won't." She frowned. "I don't—" "Break it small," he continued, already kneeling to demonstrate. "Start it with paper or bark. Once it glows, feed the damp wood on top. Don't smother it." She watched, hesitant, then nodded. He moved on. House by house he went. Some doors opened quickly, hands already extended. Others opened slowly, pride stiffening shoulders until the cold broke it down. Caleb Morris met him at the third stop, red beard bristling, eyes rimmed with sleeplessness. "You were right," Caleb said, the words scraped raw. "We were wrong." Thaddeus did not correct him. He set the sack down and showed him how to light it. Sarah Klein stood on her porch when Thaddeus reached her place, arms wrapped around herself. She watched him unload the sled, then met his eyes. "You planned for this," she said quietly. "I planned for the weather," Thaddeus replied. "People are variable." She almost smiled. Almost. By midday, smoke changed character across Larchford. It rose cleaner now, thinner, carrying the dry scent of heat that lasted. Doors stayed shut longer, windows fogged from warmth rather than damp. Children's cries quieted. Word spread fast, but Thaddeus moved faster. He did not wait for thanks. He returned uphill, loaded more sacks, and came back down again. Brask trotted beside the sled, stopping now and then to check a doorway, tail flicking when small hands reached out to touch his thick fur. He allowed it, standing solid and calm like a sentry who understood the importance of morale. Late in the afternoon, snow thickened again. The sky lowered, clouds heavy and gray. Thaddeus reached the far edge of town where a narrow house leaned against a stand of trees. Inside, he found an old man shaking uncontrollably, hands blue, stove cold. Thaddeus built the fire himself, coaxing charcoal to glow before adding damp wood. When warmth finally spread, the man wept silently into his sleeves. Outside, Sarah watched from the street, arms folded, eyes reflecting the firelight through frosted glass. She did not step forward. She simply observed, understanding settling in her posture like something earned rather than given. By nightfall, the sled was nearly empty. Thaddeus stood at the edge of town, breath steady, shoulders heavy with fatigue. Snow fell softly, erasing tracks as fast as they were made. Brask leaned against his leg, solid and warm. "They needed it," Thaddeus said quietly. Brask huffed once, as if that settled the matter. As they turned back toward the mountain, the town behind them glowed faintly, windows lit, smoke rising clean and sure into the cold sky. No cheers followed them, no applause, only warmth, returning where it had nearly vanished. On the slope above Larchford, Brask stopped once and looked back, ears high, listening to something Thaddeus could not hear. Then he turned and continued on, leading the way home through falling snow. The mountain accepted them back without comment. Snow fell with a steadier confidence now, not the tentative flakes of arrival, but the measured descent of a season settling in. Larchford moved more slowly beneath it, as if the town itself had learned to breathe shallow and conserve what warmth it had regained. The fires Thaddeus Rowan had helped restart burned low and even, their heat stretched carefully from room to room. It was no miracle. It was management, and it demanded attention. Thaddeus did not wait for the town to organize itself. He never had much faith in committees when cold was involved. Before sunrise, he tied the oilcloth tight around the last sacks of charcoal, cinching the knots so no damp air could creep in. The sled runners groaned softly as he shifted the weight, iron scraping ice with a sound that carried across the slope. Brask stood close, thick fur dusted white, amber eyes tracking every movement with calm assurance. The dog's tail lifted once, a slow arc, then stilled, ready. They went door to door again, but this time the work felt different. The urgency had softened into something heavier. People answered with eyes lowered, shoulders drawn inward, voices quieter than before. Pride does not vanish all at once. It sheds in layers. At the Klein house, Sarah met them at the threshold. She looked steadier than she had days earlier, still tall and lean, auburn hair braided back tightly again, but the lines around her eyes had eased. The warmth behind her carried into the cold air, faint and real. She stepped aside without a word and let Thaddeus pass. He checked the stove, adjusted the airflow with a practiced turn, then knelt to show her again how to break the charcoal smaller, how to space it so heat could move through instead of smothering itself. "You don't have to keep coming," she said quietly, watching his hands. "We can manage from here." Thaddeus nodded. "That's the point." Brask sat by the door while they worked, posture relaxed enough now to allow a child from next door to sneak over and press mittened hands into his thick ruff. The dog tolerated it with stoic patience, eyes half closed, tail giving a single soft thump. Laughter flickered briefly, tentative, surprised by itself, then faded into a quiet that felt earned. Outside, Thaddeus moved on. At a narrow house near the edge of town, Caleb Morris waited on the porch, red beard frosted white, shoulders hunched. He did not joke this time. He held the door open with both hands as if bracing against more than wind. Inside, the air was warmer but still uneven, corners of the room cold and shadowed. Thaddeus showed him how to place the charcoal so the stove would draw evenly, how to use less fuel to get more time. Caleb watched, jaw tight. "I thought knowing how to cut wood was enough," he said finally. "Didn't think about what happens when it won't dry." Thaddeus straightened. "Most people don't. That's how winters take them." Caleb swallowed and nodded, the admission settling into his posture like a weight he would carry for a while. They reached Elias Horn's place near midday. Elias opened the door before Thaddeus knocked, thin frame wrapped in layers that no longer shook. His hair was combed back for once, damp from melted snow, eyes clearer. He had arranged his charcoal carefully, small pieces glowing red beneath a pot of water that steamed steadily. "It works," Elias said, almost incredulous. "All night. I didn't have to keep feeding it." Thaddeus allowed himself a brief nod. "That's the idea." Elias hesitated, then blurted, "People are talking." "They always are." "Not like before," Elias said. "They're listening." That afternoon, the work took on a rhythm that reminded Thaddeus of another life. Not the war, he had learned to keep that sealed, but the aftermath, when order mattered more than explanation. He demonstrated again and again. Break the charcoal small, give it air, let it glow before adding damp wood. He corrected mistakes gently, without comment. He refused thanks with the same firmness he refused arguments. The hidden lesson settled where words would not. Heat is shared best when no one hoards it. As the sun dipped behind the ridge, Thaddeus stopped at the last house on his list. The sled was empty now, ropes slack, wood runners bare. He stood for a moment, breath fogging, and looked back at the town. Smoke rose thin and clean, drifting straight up into a sky that promised more snow. Windows glowed, doors stayed shut. Brask pressed against his leg, warm and solid. Thaddeus rested a hand on the dog's head, feeling the steady life beneath the fur. "Time," he murmured. They turned back toward the mountain together. The climb felt longer with exhaustion setting in, but Thaddeus welcomed it. Fatigue kept the past quiet. At the porch, he paused to knock snow from his boots and let Brask shake free, flakes scattering across the wood. Inside, the house was spare and calm. He set water to heat and sat, elbows on knees, listening to the wind move through the trees. Down in Larchford, something subtle had shifted. The cold remained, the night still long and sharp, but the town had learned a new discipline. Fires were tended, not fought. People spoke less and watched more. Pride had not disappeared. It had been trimmed back to a shape that could survive. Later that evening, a knock sounded at Thaddeus's door. He opened it to find Sarah standing there, snow crusting the hem of her coat. She did not step inside. She simply held out a small bundle, bread, wrapped tight, still warm. "For your trouble," she said. Thaddeus considered refusing, then accepted it with a nod. "For the road," he said, meaning the winter still ahead. She smiled, a small, honest thing. "For the lesson." After she left, Thaddeus cut the bread and shared a piece with Brask, who took it gently and lay down by the fire. Thaddeus sat back and watched the flames, their steady glow a mirror of the season's hard-earned balance. Outside, snow continued to fall, day shortening into night as it always did. But in Larchford, the cold no longer owned the dark. Fire lived there now, not loud, not wasteful, but patient. And on the mountainside, Thaddeus Rowan slept with the quiet certainty that comes from doing what needed to be done, when it needed doing, without asking who would remember. Sometimes the miracle does not arrive with thunder or light. Sometimes it arrives as foresight, discipline, and a heart willing to prepare when others laugh. In this story, no angel descended from the sky, no voice thundered from the mountain, yet God was present, in the patience of a man who listened, in the loyalty of a dog who stood watch, and in the warmth that returned to homes when hope was almost gone. The Bible reminds us, the prudent see danger and take refuge, but the simple keep going and suffer for it. What Thaddeus did was not magic, it was wisdom, and wisdom itself is a gift from God. In our daily lives, we often wait for miracles while ignoring the quiet warnings placed before us. Changes in the weather, changes in people, changes in our own hearts. God does not always shout. Often, he whispers, and those who listen early are the ones who later become a blessing to others. Maybe your charcoal today is patience. Maybe it is forgiveness. Maybe it is preparing your family, your faith, or your kindness before the storm arrives. When the cold comes, and it always does, what we prepared in love becomes warmth for many. If this story touched you, let it travel further. Share it with someone who needs hope. Leave a comment below, just a word or a number, to let us know you are here. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so we can continue walking these quiet mountain paths together. May God bless you and your home. May He keep your fire burning even when the world grows cold. And may you become, in your own way, a quiet miracle for someone else. Amen.